right, so there's so many martial artists that dream of getting into the UFC because when it comes to MMA, we see the UFC as this incredible place. This place where you can build yourself and have this huge name and maybe even get paid quite a bit of money, man. And a lot of MMA fighters have the aspiration to get into the UFC, to get in there and fight. But let me just tell you something with the UFC. The low tier fighters in the UFC, they're bums. Like, they're not really all that great, to be honest with you. Is it really that difficult to, like, actually get inside of the UFC? Just to get into the UFC, right? So I know, like, you have to go through the Dana White Contender Series. I think there's other ways, too, you can get into the UFC. I don't think you have to go through it, but there definitely are ways in which you can get into the UFC, and it's not really as hard as a lot of people think it is, man. Some martial artists are like, yeah, dude, getting to the UFC is so fucking difficult. I will never get into the UFC, but it is possible. Like, it really is possible. As a matter of fact, do y'all know, like, who Nick Newell is? He's like the one-armed fighter. He did a lot of MMA fights. I remember he competed in the Dana White Contender Series. He lost, but this dude was so close to getting to the UFC, man. And you know what's crazy? The dude just had only one arm. Yeah, he was so close. Imagine he did have an arm and he was fighting. He would be unstoppable, man. And, like, I know this dude. Like, I actually know who he is. I've trained at his gym before, so I know who Nick Newell is. Literally a dude that I know was this close to getting into the UFC, man. So what does that tell you, bro? That tells you that getting into the UFC isn't as difficult as people make it out to be. Hell, I know martial artists as well. So I know one of Nick Newell's people that he trains, right? This kid, he's like, you know, he was like 7-0 in amateur MMA, and he's like 1-0 as a pro right now. And he's really fucking good. Like, he's really, really good. And I think he has that potential to, like, possibly get into the UFC. Like, you never know. He has that platform. He has that opportunity to get into the UFC, man. And is really getting to the UFC as difficult as people make it out to be? Like, people make it out to be like, yo, like, UFC is so difficult to get into. Like, I don't know any martial artists that would get into the UFC. Bro, I know multiple MMA fighters that could get into the UFC. If they just keep training and working hard to get into the UFC, they could definitely make it, man. You know what the difficult part is? It's getting the UFC belt. Now, that's really fucking difficult because the best UFC fighters, the ones with belts, they are extremely good. Like, Islam, Taporia, like, all those people are extremely, extremely good. So, yeah, getting the belt in the UFC, that's a whole different part. Like, yeah, that's really difficult. That's, like, extremely difficult. But to actually get inside the UFC itself isn't as difficult as people make it out to be. And I really want to break that limited belief because a lot of aspiring, like, mixed martial artists, they really want to get into the UFC. And I'm here to tell you, for the first time in your life, it's possible. You can get into the UFC, but it depends on you at the end of the day. It depends on you trying to train as much as possible, really trying to work towards that goal as much as possible. If you're really hungry for it, man, if you manifest it, you can get into the UFC no problem. It's not as difficult as you make it out to be. So I want you to really break that mindset right now. You can get into the UFC, but you have to work your ass off. Now, I'm excited to announce that I've just built a brand new course. It's called the Fighter Mindset. So the most important thing when it comes to martial arts is mindset. If you don't have a good mindset, then you're practically fucked. And as a matter of fact, if you want to get into the UFC, then part of getting into the UFC is having a good mindset. If you believe in yourself and your skills, then you can 100% get into the UFC. That's why I built this course for all types of martial artists to build an unbreakable mindset and dominate in competition and get into the UFC. So check out the course. Link is in the description below. It's filled with a fuck ton of value, man. I put my heart and soul into it for y'all to enjoy. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to subscribe. And remember, my boys, stay active, stay busy, and most of all, stay hungry.